Good morning, everyone. We're still trying to figure out this whole Zoom thing, so bear with us. There we go. Hi, my name is Montana Dyer, and I am the bag feed sales rep for Godfrey's Feed. We're going to go ahead and get started. Wayman is here with us and is going to do our presentation, and we're mainly going to talk about our show feeds, and then also just a good bit of information about reading a feed tag correctly and the way that you can make good decisions when you go to purchase those products in the feed store. If you have questions throughout the meeting, if you wanted to put them in the chat while he's doing his presentation, and then I'll be moderating those. And then also at the end, we'll just let everyone unmute themselves and we can ask questions that way. But if there is not any, and then if you'll just go ahead and make sure that you're muted as we start the conversation, and then towards the end of his, we'll get everyone unmuted. But we really appreciate you joining us this morning. I know a lot of you are FFA teachers, so welcome. We're glad that we were able to do this a little bit differently this year with the FFA convention. So happy to be able to see everyone's faces and or at least hear your voice. And like I said, if you have questions, feel free to ask them, and I'm going to turn it over to Wayman.
Thanks, Montana. Appreciate all you guys joining us here, and appreciate your interest in the feed and your business. And we enjoy working with you guys. If anybody has any questions at any point during this discussion, and I'd like to emphasize discussion, speak up, do something. I haven't done a whole lot of these, so I'm not real sure the best way for everybody to get recognized, but do something. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll kind of get started a little bit on this Zoom meeting here. So I'm Wayman Hunt, and I'm the sixth generation here at Godfrey's. Started way back in the 1870s, and my dad has recently retired, so I am the only Hunt in the business at the present time. So if you guys have any questions or need anything, don't hesitate to give me a call or reach out to me as email or however. But we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thanks for joining us. So Godfrey's Feed is here in Madison, and we're going to talk a little bit about some show feeds that we've got, and we're going to talk about how to read a tag, which I think is something that's really, really important. And then I usually talk a little bit about some things that I think that are really simple, but I think they're things that are overlooked a lot of times. If we, yeah. So I think I want to make sure that everybody understands that there's no one magic bullet that creates the best show heifer or best steer or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of things that go into it, and
we buy our feed from these guys, and these are our reps right here.
And I think that the quality genetics are a huge part of it. I think that feed is a huge part of it, and I think that elbow grease is a huge part of it. And
people pay to do this, so they do.
So I would say
this is the rep, and these are some other ag teachers, and that's.
You want to see if you can mute everybody. So the first thing that I talk about is you can have the best heifer in the world, and if you don't take care of her, she's not going to do real well. And you can take an average animal and take great care of her and beat a lot of people with her. And so there's a lot of I think it's a three-pronged approach as far as feed, nutrition, genetics, and then daily care. So best thing to do is, if you're not great at picking a heifer out. Get your county agent involved, get your ag teacher involved. I notice a lot of these folks on here are involved with the children and with the youth, and those guys love to help and help, get some help picking an animal out. And then once you do that, then let's get them on a good feed. We typically, you want to switch? We typically, do one more, please. We typically like to start our cattle up with the growers and with the, but I think what we probably need to start with first is being able to read a tag. And on a tag, all feeds are not created equally. There's a lot of different ways that I can make a 12% protein feed. But when we sit down and look at a tag, you're going to see things like the name of the feed on there. You're going to see the purpose of the product, what it's for, what class of animal it's for, if it's medicated, things like that. You're going to, all the feed tags in Georgia have to have a minimum protein, a minimum fat, and a maximum fiber. And so that means that when it says 12% protein, it has to be at least 12% protein. It says 2.5% fat, it has to be at least 2.5% fat. And the fiber is 10%, so that's a maximum of fiber. They'll have an ingredients list. They'll have feeding directions, warnings, if there's any warnings, like if there's medication in there, if there's any kind of withdrawals, things like that. And then they'll have the weight of the product and who has actually manufactured that product. So remember that soybean meal is probably the premier source of protein in the feed world. And corn gluten, distillers grains, wheat mids, there's a lot of products that people use for protein sources. And wheat mids, for example, I think are 16% protein. And if I pelletized wheat mids and put them on this and made a tag for them, it'd look pretty good. But the cattle aren't going to do real well. And so it's really important, you know, your mama always told you need to eat everything on your plate. And it's kind of like that with these cattle feeds and feeds in general. And the more ingredients we can use, the broader spectrum of nutrients we can put in there, the better these cattle will do. So be real careful looking at feed tags. Like I said, you take this 12% horse feed tag that we've got right here, and those cattle they'll do a whole lot better on that than they will that 16% pelletized wheat mids. Let's look at the next slide, Montana, please. So you can see right here, I've got several different feeds that are feed 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can look and I don't know, this is a little bit more of an interactive kind of discussion here, but when you look at feed 1, it's 13.5% protein, 4.2 fat, and 15 fiber. That looks pretty good. 2 is 12.5, 5, and 15. 3 is 16.5, 4, and 15. And then the 4 is 16, 3, and 15. And so they all look very similar as to what their compositions are. And so you probably sit down at the store and have a hard time deciphering which one of these you need to do. Let's look at that next slide. And so these are some of this is the analysis off of these feeds that we were looking at. And you can see feed 1 and feed 2. And so feed 1 is the winning program cattle grower, and the feed 2 is the finisher. And you can see how these are the different breakdowns. So that feed the tag was 13.2. You can see this one's 13.7. So we try to engineer these feeds, if you will, to have more. We put more protein in there so that we don't ever come up short with any of these things. Energy is also a big deal. You know, you can see that these feeds are in the 72% TDN range, which is a pretty good feed. You know, one of the things that we've got to balance too is when we're feeding cattle is how much fiber can we put in the diet, because fiber makes those cattle look full. And that's really what we want to do, in particular on show day, is make those cattle look really full. But we've got to balance that with getting enough energy in them and protein in them to keep them growing. So these are the two winning program feeds, or two of the winning program feeds, the grower and the finisher. Let's look at the next one. And then these are two other feeds here. Let's see, 4, you can see is a 66% TDN. And then 3 was a feed that we kind of made up. And you can see 3, if you go all, well, it's all the way down the bottom. The TDN on feed 3 is 56.42. You can see that it does have 4% fat in it, which makes it look really good. And see the protein in 16.53, but the TDN is 56.42. And that feed right there was one that we made, excuse me, that had a bunch of peanut hulls in it, had a bunch of corn gluten in it, and I can't remember what else we put in there, but we really tried. I think we put some urea in it. And the point of the exercise here is to show you that feed really fit in really, really well with the other 4 feeds. I'm not sure that just looking at a feed tag, you wouldn't just jump on that one and buy it, because the other thing that's going to happen is that feed's going to be the cheapest feed of the bunch as well. So you've got to be really careful. You can't always just jump on a feed based on what a feed tag says, because like I was saying, there's a lot of ways that we can go through and massage that tag, if you will, to get numbers, to get a printout that's going to look really, really nice, but is ultimately not going to, the cattle aren't going to perform well on it. So I think that's one of the things that's really important about, that you should know about our feeds, is that we don't change these rations. When we make a ration, it stays that way. And I think that's a really important thing, because when we're pushing these cattle, people think these show cattle live a life of luxury, and in a lot of ways they do, but we are pushing them as hard as we possibly can with these feeds, because we want to get every ounce of growth out of them that we can. We want them growing as fast as we can. We want them to be the premier animal in that barn. And in order to do that, we've got to look after them really, really well. So I think that when we start feeding these cattle at the rates that we are, it's really important to have that diet very consistent. And so that's one of the reasons why, and probably the main reason why, we do not mess with these formulas, which is going to probably cause our feed prices to fluctuate more than some people. But I think it's critical that we keep those things on an even nutrition plane. These winning program feeds have Bovatech in them, which will increase feed efficiency somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%. I think the paperwork will tell you 8 to 10. And so I think that's really important. We've got Amifirm in these feeds that also helps keep that rumen stable, increases feed efficiency as well. We've got chelated vitamins in there. We're actually putting a new product in our feeds now that is it's out of the chili peppers, and it helps keep these cattle cooler in warm temperatures. We've been mixing it in the feed now for about, almost a year now. And we started trying it at our place. We saw favorable results. And a lot of these hair products that are out there have the capsicum in it, and I think it's called cinnamaldehyde. And those two things work together. They help stabilize the rumen and increase feed efficiency, as well as they're vasodilators, which means that it helps open up the blood vessels, which on these cattle in particular, on the surface, on their skin, if we can open up those blood vessels, then we can get more blood flow and we can get more heat exchange. So I'm a pretty big fan of it during the summertime. We're trying to select these cattle that are breeding, that are going to be hairy for the show ring, which in our part of the world is not really a desirable trait as a pasture cow. But when we start getting into the summertime and it's hot, this product will help keep them cool, help keep them gaining, and help keep them comfortable, because that's the biggest thing. We want them comfortable so that they'll continue to eat. The other thing that it does during the winter time, it helps keep them a little bit cooler. So maybe they grow a little bit more hair. Maybe they eat a little bit more. And so it'll help increase consumption on these cattle as well. So we've been real pleased with what's happened with it. That's something that we can also mix into other feeds as well, if anybody's interested in it. So I'm really excited about these new additives that we put in there. I've seen it in a lot of premixes, but I don't know that I've seen it in anybody's feed out on the market. So it's been really good and worked really well. Going back to a little bit, I'm going to take a step back here and talk about one of the things that I think that's super, super important as well is making sure that you weigh that feed every single day. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves is we have a digital scale in our barn, and I can't emphasize enough to you how important that scale is in feeding a show heifer, because if she's getting fat, we've got to be able to back her down. And if she's not getting fat enough, we've got to be able to raise her up. And feed density is going to change on a daily basis. So I highly, highly, highly encourage, recommend, suggest, demand that you get a scale and weigh that feed, because the other thing that happens is that coffee can, if you give that coffee can to 5 different people to fill up, everybody's going to put a different amount of feed in there. And as much as we all want our children to do all of the work, at some point during the journey, they're not the ones feeding those cattle. So, and 2, we all know how children are too. I've got a 10-year-old that goes through all the hoops to make sure that the scale reads 7.00, and if I hit 7.02, I have screwed it up. So I get corrected on that pretty regular. But you know, I think that there's a lot of things that go into being successful in this daily care, and the importance of a routine and being consistent is very, very important in what we're doing out there. So make sure that you stick with everything. Make sure you get them on that routine. When we're feeding these cattle like we are, it's real important that we feed them as close to every 12 hours or every 6 hours or whatever the routine you get on, because the pH in that rumen, and we've got products in the feed that help regulate the rumen pH, but the pH in that rumen staying as close to stable as possible is a really, really important part of this. So I would say if you feed them at 8 and 8, then feed them at 8 and 8. If if it's, and some people can't do 8 and 8. If it's 6 o'clock in the morning and then 6 o'clock in the afternoon, that's awesome too. But if it's not exactly on 12 hours, it's not the end of the world, but just try to keep it as consistent as you possibly can, before school and at 5 o'clock or whatever the times may be. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're rinsing these cattle, during the summertime. It's not only important for hair growth, but it's also real important keeping those cattle cool. And the cooler we keep them, the better they'll eat, the better they'll gain. So make sure we're doing that. How much time do we have? We're trying. Okay. All right. So I think that those are some things that are super important. Some of the feeds that we have, I'd talk about those, what we're doing now. We pretty well have 3 winning program feeds that would be the main portion of your diet. We've got the grower, the finisher, and stuffed. And stuffed and finisher are kind of, I wouldn't say opposites, but they're kind of opposites. And then the grower. And we like to start our cattle off, our babies. I'll throw one more feed on here that is not on here, and that's our super calf. A lot of times we'll start our babies off on super calf. Super calf is a 17% protein feed. And when those calves are little, we want to get as much protein in them as we can. We want to get as much lean growth on them as we can, because it's in particular in the British breeds, which is where we operate with Herefords. those cattle can get fat real easily. And so I want to have a high protein feed that is going to be high quality. And that's what we've got with that super calf. It's the main source of protein in it is going to be soybean meal. And then it's going to have plenty of corn in it, some oats, some cottonseed hulls, chelated vitamins, or chelated minerals and vitamins, and yeast as well. And so it is a really, really good product. It will help put that lean muscle growth and help them develop their skeletons to maximum potential without getting as much fat cover on them. So once those calves get in that, I'd say 500-pound range, then we're starting to think about, a lot of times we'll double suck them, which is pretty labor intensive, but it helps get more nutrients in those calves and keeps them growing. And we've had a lot of good results with that, and it's kind of the same thing. If you're not double sucking them, then you can have them on a creep feeder and keep them out there with mama and keep pushing them. And that's where that super calf comes in. But when they start getting up there in that 500-pound range, that's when we'll start easing them over to probably the winter program grower. And it's a little bit less protein. Actually, we got the number wrong on here. It's 13.5% protein. And the fat is correct. The fiber's correct also. But the grower is going to be a 13% protein, and it's got enough protein to keep those cattle growing and pushing them into the next stage. And I am, at that time, I am feeding these calves as much as I can possibly get in them. And we're pushing them hard, trying to get as much in them. And this is where having that scale comes in really, really handy, because when we're pushing them, if we feed them a little bit too much, then we can push them a little bit more acidic, which can start a tidal wave of upset stomach, indigestion. They can get loose, scours, whatnot. And so it's really important that we keep them on that consistent feeding schedule and feeding rates, so that we know exactly what we're putting in them every single time. So make sure you use that scale and keep it going. But we're pushing these cattle hard, and we're going to keep them on that grower until they start to show some finish. And this is a spot where, and I would encourage you all along the way to talk to your ag teachers, your FFA advisors, your 4-H advisor, whoever you have in your community that you're working with. Have those folks come out and look at your cattle, and they don't need to look at them every day. You're looking at them every day, and it's easy when you look at them every day to maybe not realize that they're falling behind, or maybe not realize that they're getting too fat. And so it's great to have those outside eyes come in and look at those cattle and evaluate them. And maybe once a month would be a good number. I might even try to get them to come every 2 or 3 weeks, just because if you wait a month and you've gone the wrong direction for a whole month, then you might wake up and go, good gosh, I got a ways to go to catch up or get it put back. So have those folks come in periodically and look at your cattle and give you an assessment if they think they're on schedule or if they're getting too fat or falling behind. But once our cattle start showing a little bit of flesh, and by flesh I mean fat conditioning, we'll switch them over to stuff. And for these British type cattle, the easy fleshing type cattle, this winter program stuffed has been phenomenal for us. It's a lower starch. We still keep the protein up, and these cattle will keep growing on it. You can put more of it in them, and the cattle will have done really well on it. It's going to have the same bells and whistles as the other feeds do, but it's just lower energy. When we keep that protein up, because as those cattle get larger, they need less protein in their diet, but we want to keep this protein up there, because the next thing that happens is we start adding, in particular to cattle that are getting too much finish on them, we'll start adding something like double barrel to it, because double barrel is very, very low in TDN. And I kind of touched on TDN, and I probably should have spoken a little bit more about it, but TDN is total digestible nutrients. And that is a rough estimate of how much good those cattle are getting out of that feed. So like we were looking at that feed number 3, I think it was, and it was 54% TDN. So if you feed them 100 pounds of that feed, they're going to actually digest 54 pounds of it, versus like the grower and the finisher were at 72% TDN. And so if we fed them 100 pounds of that, they're going to digest 72 pounds of it. So the winning program double barrel is way down. I think it may even be in the 30s on TDN. And so it's really not digestible. The great thing about it though is it swells up, and we've done some tests on it, and it will nearly triple in volume from the pellets. And that's actually a picture of it that you can see there in the lower left-hand corner on the screen. But it'll actually triple in size and volume once you put it in water. So that goes really well with the stuffed. It works really well with it works great with all of them, because we'll actually feed it all through the process. And one of the things that I like about it, it's kind of like you and I are, when we eat a lot, we like to eat a lot. And we stretch your stomach out, and then you're more likely to be hungry. And after you've gone on a diet and don't eat a whole lot, well, then your stomach shrinks back, and you don't want to eat as much. It doesn't take as much to be full. So we like mixing in some of that double barrel all along. I think the tag on it says 2 to 4 pounds per head per day, or as experience would indicate. And, we've had some calves that we've had on this stuff that were eating probably 15 pounds of it a day. And it's all going to depend on what kind of condition they're in. But as a daily feed, I really wouldn't feed a lot of it until you start getting those cattle on up with a little bit of condition, a little bit of size to them. And then you can really start working on fill. And the double barrel works great, like I said, with all of them. Obviously, the stuffed feed is more of a coasting kind of feed. It's more of a feed that is going to be a long-term feed. And then we kind of counter that with the finisher, which is more of a short-term feed. Now, there are cattle, in particular, some of those exotic breeds, those guys are a little bit harder doing, or a little bit harder to get fat. And so that finisher is a great feed to put those cattle on, because we can continue to push them. We can do all the same things that we're doing with the stuff, but we can do it with the finisher, and that's going to be a higher energy, higher starch. You can see it's all the way up at 5% fat versus the 2.5 on the stuffed. And when you look at the 5% fat and 12.5% protein, and it's got a ton of corn in it. So that feed right there is going to be, is going to put fat on these cattle. It's going to put condition on them and help catch them up, put bloom on those cattle. One of the things that we do a lot of is we'll get them fat for this show, and then we'll take them home and and honestly, we'll put them on soybean meal and cottonseed hulls there for 2 to 4 weeks and just keep the protein in them so they continue to grow, but we kind of cut most of the energy out of it. And then they'll start sucking that fat off of them. And then come time before the next show, 4 to 8 weeks before the next show, then we'll bring them back in and start greasing them back up again. And so depending on how well your cattle respond to the feed, we do it with the stuff, like I was saying, because those British cattle are really easy fleshing, but some of these cattle may need to go on the finisher. And we've done a good job with getting those cattle fat either way. I saw a question pop up.
You see it?
I don't.
We have a belly Galloway, which would get fat pretty easily. What would be your suggestion for a good daily feed for them?
I would be did everybody see that question? I don't know if anybody could hear. Montana just read it to me. There's a belted Galloway. What would be a good daily feed for them? And I would I would expect that stuffed would be where you want to be with those cattle. You can push them a little bit harder with that. You can keep them full. I'd feed those cattle just like we're feeding our Herefords, and feeding them some of the double barrel and the stuffed as well. And you know, a number that another set of skills you need is you need to be able to weigh those heifers as well. A number that I have seen over the years when we have not just sat down and said, we're going to feed these things 2.25% of their body weight, but time and time again, when I weigh the calves and weigh the amount of feed that we're feeding them, the grain portion that's coming to them in a bucket is somewhere in that 2.25% of their body weight. That's kind of maybe a benchmark, a place to start, a place to think about, where you could get things going. You know, I probably wouldn't start a heifer out. If you bought a brand new heifer and brought her home, I'd kind of see what the guys had been feeding her from where she came from. But I wouldn't get one up out of the pasture and just immediately give them that much. I'd ease them into it over the course of a couple of weeks. Excuse me. But that'd be going back to the belted Galloway. I'd be feeding stuffed, I think, and the double barrel as well. I think that's a real good combination. I think that's a great combination. So let's see. We also have a probiotic paste that use it in cattle in particular. Go to the show while we're at the show and after the show. It'll help with appetite. It'll help keep that rumen stable. It'll help keeping those cattle gaining and doing well. You know, one of the things that we have not talked about a whole lot is on show day, and everything that you do on a daily basis leads up to show day. And so we want to have those cattle on a daily routine that's going to kind of mimic what we expect to happen on show day. You know, we try to get a lot of fiber in our cattle. You know, the biggest thing that you can do on show day is make sure those things are full, make sure that they're eating good. And that's where like the probiotic paste come in. It'll help stimulate that appetite. It'll help keep things moving, and the cattle will eat a little bit better when you do that. But so we kind of set our daily routine at home based on what we expect to happen at the show. So when we're a month, 2 months out, 2 weeks out, we've got the cattle on our schedule, more or less. You know, it's got to work for the cattle and the people, but we're more concerned about making sure that we can do what needs to be done, and try not to let the cattle run our lives during those times. But when we get inside of 2 weeks going to the next show, then we really start focusing on, all right, what is the absolute best thing for these cattle? And we are going to regulate their water. We're going to regulate their feed. We're going to try to feed them at the times that are going to make them hungry before we think we're going to go in the ring. You know, it's one of the neat things, the good and the bad things that has happened at the state shows, the fair and the junior national, is that we've got a routine set, and I think it rotates one later. I think whatever breed, you know, if you were the first breed this year, you're going to be the second breed next year, and the third breed the next year, and so on. So you kind of have an idea. If you went last year, you kind of have an idea of when your cattle are going to show. And so we try to get it where our cattle are used to being fed, you know, a couple of hours before we think they're going to show. That way we can get them fed, and then we can lay them down for a little while, maybe a little bit more than 2 hours, but somewhere in that ballpark where we can get them fed, get them laid back down, then get them up, get them fit, and then we offer them water. The other thing that we do with our cattle is our cattle are used to going in the barn all day and having no water at all during the day. And that happens from the day we get them. And you need to be careful with them. You need to watch them and make sure that it's not presenting a problem. But our cattle will come in the barn in the morning. They don't have any day, and they go out at water all night long. So they drink and they're happy and everything's good. But what we're doing does two things. One, it teaches them to eat without water, and two, we can regulate that water a little bit better, so that now they know, okay, I got some water, and I may not get any more water for a little while. So when I see it, I need to drink it. And about a week or 10 days before the show, we empty the water trough in the night pasture, and we offer them water in the mornings when they come in the barn, out of a bucket. We use the same bucket we're going to use at the show. And at night when they go, when we finish, we offer them water, the same buckets. And then they learn that, okay, I'm going to get water in the morning, I'm going to get water in the afternoon. And it takes them a few days. And that's why we start to, a week or 10 days before the show, so that we get them on that routine of, okay, now I got water, now I need to drink. And I think that this goes hand in hand with your feeding program, because if they're not drinking water, it doesn't matter how good of a job you've done for the last 6 months. When you come to the show, everybody's been there. You get there, and at some point they won't drink any water. And so part of the problem, I think, is that these cattle get worked up, they get nervous, they're not used to being in town, not to mention there might be chlorine in the water there, and you don't have chlorine at home. So make sure you get a filter when you go to the show. But anything that's just slightly off, those cattle go, you know what, I'm going to get turned out tonight. They're thinking this in their head. I'm going to get turned out tonight, and there'll be some water out there, and I can drink something then. And then you take them out there to tie outs, and there is no water out there. They still haven't drank anything. And then by the time they come back in and do drink something, they've been so dehydrated, they've got their stomach all messed up. Things aren't digesting right. Their appetite's messed up, and it snowballs from there. So we like to make sure that we get them on a good water routine and feed routine, and we try to mimic what it's going to be like for those cattle when they get to the show, so that they kind of expect, it's not unexpected to them when they get there and there isn't any water there, or they get there and they're only getting fed at A, B, and C times. So I think that those are really important things. Little things like keeping feed pans clean. We make sure we wash those things out. We keep them clean all the time. In the ideal world, we'd wash that feed pan out after every feeding, turn it upside down, and let it dry. In the real world, everybody's busy and got so much going on that sometimes that doesn't happen. The one thing that I would tell you is that if you look at the people that are winning, those people do the little things that make a big difference. They're on the money when they get there, as far as timing of feeding, making sure it's consistent, making sure they get a good product in front of them, making sure that they're pushing those cattle, their water's clean. Those people are doing all the little things. They're rinsing them sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. One thing that I would tell you is that as important as rinsing them is, getting them dry is equally as important, because it'll do as much damage to you as not rinsing them can. So make sure that when you dry, I think everybody's probably heard this, that when you think they're dry them for another 30 minutes. So keep doing that. This time of year, make sure you're not using the heater on your dryer. It'll speed everything up, but it's already 95, 100 degrees outside in the barn, and then you're going to put a heater on them as well, and that ends up causing a lot of problems as well. Everything that we can do to keep these cattle cool. I'm going to go back and mention the additives that we've got in our show feeds now. I think that those are really, really cool. I think that they're doing a really neat job. And I will be doing a little bit more advertising on those products as well in the future. But I've been real pleased with them, and the cattle have responded well. We had a calf last year that for this part of the world, that had a lot of hair, and that booger kept growing all summer long. She didn't slow down. She didn't slow up eating. It's only one animal, but it sure seems to have made a big difference on her as well. Does anybody have any questions? I think the next slide is something about our rewards program. By all means, make sure you save your tags. There's a lot of cool stuff in the, I guess, in the team store, and you can get with Montana or your dealer to get those products ordered. If you got anything that you really like to see or really want to do, call us. We'd like to look at it. We've been making some cool new jackets this year that I think have been well received as well. Does anybody have any questions, anything that they'd like to discuss at this point? No, I must have done a really good job of explaining all this stuff. Well, Montana and I and everybody here appreciate your interest and appreciate you signing on and listening. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to call us or email or whatever. I'm here all the time and love doing this stuff and love answering those questions. So if there's anything at all we can do, please let us know. We appreciate all the ag teachers and FFA personnel and 4-H advisors and anybody else that I've left out that spend a lot of time working with these kids. I talked to my 4-H, my extension agent here in Madison, and every time I talk to her, I make it a point to tell her thank you, because I know how many hours those guys put in to what they do, and if they actually figured out what they got paid per hour, they'd probably file a labor lawsuit against somebody, because it ain't enough. But we appreciate what you guys do and the effort you put into them, and we enjoy helping you guys whenever we can. So if there's anything that we can do to help you, don't hesitate to call us or get in touch with me or Montana, and I'll offer up one more chance for anybody to ask any questions, and if not, we appreciate you guys tuning in.
I did also want to say that if there's I've had a few ag teachers email me asking if this recording would be available, so you could maybe show it to any other students that you have. So my email, I'm going to put it in the chat box, and then if you are interested in that, I can definitely shoot it over to you. I think we also had a few of my feed dealers on, and if you're interested, you obviously have my email, but I'd be happy to send it to you as well. For those of you that don't know where your closest Godfrey's dealer is, you can go to our website, and that's just godfreysfeed.com, and type in your zip code, and it'll pop up and show you kind of where your closest one is. If you don't have one close to you, reach out to me via that email as well, and we can see if we can find someone that would be a good fit for us. I'm going to put Wayman's email as well if you have any further questions and just don't feel comfortable asking them. We'd be happy to talk to you about anything. So, anything else?
I guess that's it. We appreciate you guys, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you at a show soon.